pairwise analysis to identify the relative priorities between each of these drivers. For example, business driver A is more important than the business driver B. Business driver B is more important than business driver C, so forth, and so on and so forth. You have to go ahead and sit with your stakeholders and get their inputs on how these business drivers are important to the organization. The good thing about Project Server is that it actually has a built-in tool that lets you go ahead and prioritize these business drivers for you. So let's go ahead and see how you do this. I'll go back to my Project Server and go ahead and click on the driver prioritization. So as you can see, I have 3 different stakeholders, and I have gone ahead and created 3 different priorities because all these stakeholders have different view of how the organization needs to go forward. So I'm going to take the CIO prioritization because I've already done that with him. Actually, let me go back because I cannot make changes to it. I'm already using it in one of my analysis. I'll use the CIO prioritization. So when I go in here, I can define the priorities right here. Basically, what options Project Server gives is it'll pick the first driver statement that you already inputted and go ahead and compare it with the other drivers that you have already defined in your system. So let's say, for example, in this case, expand into new market segment is as important as improving customer satisfaction score. I can change it to, let's say, well, I don't think it's as important as customer satisfaction. I think it is less important than the improving customer satisfaction. You have to sit down with your stakeholders and go through this process of comparing each driver with the other one and giving the importance of each drivers. As you go next, you will compare the other ones, keep comparing each and every drivers that you have defined. As you see, the list keeps going down because you've already compared the other 2 in the previous step. Now, once you do all your prioritization, the result is this. What Microsoft Project does is it goes ahead and gives you a priority list of saying, well, according to what input you have given me, we think that the reduced expense phase is the highest priority that you have when you compare each and every prioritization. It does some calculations in the background and goes ahead and provides this information to you. Now, if you notice over here, there's something called as the consistency ratio. Basically, what this consistency ratio is, so let's say, for example, when you have 3 drivers, you have driver A, B, and C. In the driver prioritization, you go ahead and say driver A is more important than driver B. In the next one, you say, well, actually, you say driver A is as important as B. Then you say driver C is significantly more important than driver B. And then you say A is more important than driver C. Let me pull up a notepad and show you what I'm talking about. It'll be a lot easier to follow that way. So when I say A is as important as B, I'm saying A and B are equally important. Then I go ahead and say C is more important than B. And then I'm saying A is more important than C. If you look at this, when I'm saying A is equal to B and C is greater than B, you can automatically say that, C has to be, well, actually I said, C has to be less important than A, which while it's the logical aspect of it, if C is greater than B, then C has to be greater than A. You get the gist of it. So what basically this consistency ratio says is, how consistent are you when you're defining your priorities, when you're defining the priorities? It is really not easy to get 100%. Most of the time that I've done prioritization. I've never gone over 92%. So it's quite common, simply because we're humans. We have different perspective, and we do make mistakes when we actually go ahead and do the driver prioritization. There could also be lack of insufficient information for us to go ahead and prioritize these drivers, and sometimes that makes the consistency ratio a little lower. We also don't have enough information or poorly defined model right now, so that we can't really define these driver prioritization correctly, and that's why it's a little less. So a driver prioritization, which is more than 80%, is generally considered as a good consistency ratio for your prioritization. It's considered really good. Usually anything under 80, I would go ahead and redo my driver prioritization. I would go ahead and sit with my stakeholder and redo the whole thing to get it a little bit over 80 and define these logical dependencies of these drivers. So I've gone ahead and done my driver prioritization. I've already prioritized my driver. The next step is resource pool. Now, resource pool is something that has to be in place before you do any kind of portfolio analysis, because the portfolio analysis part uses your resources to assign, define your cost of your project, define when they can start, if you have enough resources to start this project at a particular time, things like that. So you need to have these resources set up in your project way before you even start the portfolio analysis part of your project. Now, the key fields that you need to define when doing your resource pool is the maximum units, which basically determines the maximum availability of each resources. You need to define the calendars for these resources. Basically, any PTOs that they have, that affects the availability of your resources. The roles that each of these resources play, because you can actually, the role field is basically used to calculate the availability of a particular role and the average cost of resources in that specific role. We'll look into that detail when we do the resource analysis part. And of course the standard rate, so that we can define the cost of your project. Now you can define these resources or the cost of your project in two ways, bottom up or top down. Bottom up basically means that you go ahead and a project manager will go ahead and define your project, assign resources to the task, and then publish these projects in your project server. The other way is, instead of assigning resources to your project, and you don't want to do that right now, what you can do is you can create a high-level resource plan, and this resource plan basically reserves the resources for a predefined period of time. Temporarily reserves these resources. So you can do it either way, and portfolio analysis picks up whichever way you want to do this in. So once you have your resources defined, project dependencies. Now, Microsoft Project also provides you a method of defining project dependencies. So sometimes projects are dependent on each other. There are 4 dependencies that Microsoft Project allows you to do. Let's look at those. So this is when I'm going to go into my portfolio analysis. We've set up our portfolio analysis. Whatever is required to do the portfolio analysis has already been set up. Now is when we actually do the portfolio analysis. Till now, we were just preparing for portfolio analysis. Project dependencies. What I can do is I can go ahead and set up project dependencies. So there are 4 kinds of dependencies that I can define over here. The first one is dependencies. Basically what this means is a particular project will not be selected until all the other dependent projects have been selected. This does not really mean that the primary project will be automatically selected if the dependent projects are selected. The other one is mutual inclusion, which basically means that either all of the projects that are defined in this are selected or all of them are excluded. You cannot have just one of these projects included in your portfolio. You can have mutual inclusion. So let's say you have a couple of projects that are competing for the same purposes. What you can do is you can say, well, if this particular project is included in my portfolio, the other one is automatically excluded. You can define these mutual exclusion. The finish to start is usually not used for cost analysis. It's more used for resource analysis part of it. And we'll talk about it as we do the analysis part of it. But there are 4 ways in which you can define your dependencies on projects. Right now, I do have a mutual inclusion dependency already defined. So basically, I have a project called ECRM. And what I'm saying is all these 3 projects have dependencies of mutual inclusion. So if one of the project is included, all of them are included. If one of them is excluded, all of them are excluded. I already have that defined over here. So let's go back to our portfolio analysis. So now we have everything in place for defining or for actually doing portfolio analysis. So let's go ahead and set up some of the settings for our analysis. I already have analysis done over here, so I'm just going to be modifying them a little bit. I don't want to waste time in actually showing you each and every setting and typing everything up. So I already have everything set up over here. So initially what you're going to do is you're going to name your portfolio analysis. Now it is important that you name it correctly because in the previous screen, as you see over here, if you have multiple analysis displayed, they will be sorted using alphabetically sorted. So you want to go ahead and have a naming convention set up over there. Usually I prefer having the year name or the year and the month number, so that it sorts correctly for me. You can provide a description if you want. You can also filter it by departments. If you select a department, only resources from this department will be considered. All the other resources will be ignored. You select the business drivers that you want to use for this portfolio analysis. So we had 3 different portfolio analysis defined in the previous step. We're going to select which one we want to do. In this case, I've selected the CIO prioritization. You select the projects that you want to be included on this particular portfolio analysis. I already have a set of projects defined, and I've already included them in this analysis part. You define the main constraint that you're going to use for your cost. So let's say you have a project level field called project budget, where you will put all the budgets that are on the, that you're going to use on the project. So you need to define which of that field you're going to use to determine the cost constraint on your portfolio. You need to define the planning horizon for your project, for your resources, as to when you need to consider your start and end date of your projects. You need to provide the field that actually defines the resource roles. I already have a custom project field called position role. A resource field called position role that defines the role of each of my resources. You can filter some of the resources that you do not want to include in your analysis. You can do it through RBS, or you can use a department field in order to filter out some of these resources that you don't want to be included. The resource capacity, this basically defines if you want to only include the committed resources, or you also want to use the proposed assignment on your projects. Usually by default it is always committed, but sometimes as you define your projects and your resource availability, you need to determine if you want to use the proposed resources in your analysis or not. The alias for force in, force out, we will talk about this as we do our analysis part, but you can just predefine a lookup table that determines why you would be a reason for forcing in your project or forcing out your project. So we already defined our analysis. The next step to do is prioritize your project. Basically say which of these drivers affect your project in what way. So for example, if I look at my analysis right now, I see the audit tracking solution project. Well, it has no effect on the expand into market segment, has no effect on this particular project. It has low impact on the improved customer satisfaction, things like that. I can manually go ahead and change this. I can sit with my stakeholders and go through changing or defining these when I'm doing my analysis part. So I've already done that for our presentation. I didn't want to go ahead and sit here and do that for us. So I've already gone ahead and defined each of these projects with their effect on the business drivers. So once you have all this set up in there, the next step, what Microsoft Project does is it automatically goes ahead and calculates the priority of your projects. It automatically determines, depending on the impact, the driver prioritization and your projects, how it affects these drivers. It comes up with this priority list and tells you which projects are of a higher priority as compared to the other one. So you have all this information, you see which projects are more important to you, but that does not necessarily mean that you will only do the top higher priority projects. There are some cases where you have to do the other projects because probably it just gives you a more value for your money. So let's look at all that. That's what portfolio analysis lets you do. So let's go ahead and do that over here. So let's do some cost analysis. As soon as I click on cost analysis, Microsoft Project goes ahead and I'm just going to hide my quick launch. Microsoft Project goes ahead and does some calculations and shows you, what projects you should be doing depending on the constraints that you have on your cost. Right now, as soon as you click on the Analyze Cost button, Microsoft Project assumes that you have, unlimited amount of money to do any projects that you want, so it automatically selects all the projects that are in there. Now, over here, if you see the project budget is the field that we had selected, which defines the cost of doing these projects. Now, you can go ahead and change these settings. You can change the value of your cost. So right now, let's say, for example, as I said, Microsoft assumes that you have unlimited amount of money, so it automatically selects all the projects. But that's not always true. You do not have unlimited amount of money. You have limited money that you need to that you can spend on projects. So let's say, for now, I will change my project budget to show $13 million. I'll say I do not have $17 million. I only have $13 million to do these projects. Let's go ahead and recalculate what effect does this have on our projects. So when I go ahead and recalculate, it goes ahead and does some calculation in the background and comes up with results and says, well, if you have only $13 million and not $17 million, you can only do so many projects. These projects you cannot do because you do not have enough money. Depending on the priority that they have, it will select the top prioritized projects and remove the ones that are not as important in your prioritization. As you can see now, my total project budget is only 12. I'm only spending $12.8 million as compared to 7.8 that was showing up before. Now, if you notice over here, you will see that the least, the projects that have the least priorities are the ones that are taken out first, and then the ones that are higher priority, depending on the budget that the cost of doing these projects. Let's say, for example, I do not have $13 million, but I only have $12 million. Let's recalculate using that. And notice what effect it has on the projects that were not selected. If you notice, once I put in 12 million instead of the 13 million, some of the projects that were moved out are moved back in, and some of the projects that were already in the system have been taken out. Now, if you notice it carefully, let me go up a little bit. My total project budget right now is only $10.5 million. I have $12 million, so I have another $1.5 million to do additional projects. Now, if you notice this particular project, the automated software installation project, it only has $800,000 that it needs to do it. Well, I have the money. Why is it taken off? If you remember when we did the driver prioritization, or when we did the project dependencies, we said all these three projects that depend on each other, if one of them is not included, none of them will be included. Now, since we do not have enough money to do these two projects, it took them out. And because it took those out, it took this particular project out also because of that dependency. So you need to be really careful when you're defining these dependencies. You want to make sure that you track these dependencies, because you will not know what effect it has on your project if you did not know that you had defined these dependencies previously. Now, the other thing that you see over here is the efficient frontier. Basically, efficient frontier is a line that represents the optimal portfolio. Anything that lies below the line are suboptimal because they do not provide enough return on investment, depending on the risk and everything that you have defined previously. And anything above the line that shows over here has does not provide enough return as opposed to a higher risk that it carries with it. You can also look at the strategic alignment. Now, strategic alignment, basically a graph that shows the cost and the importance of each and every driver that you have selected right now when you're doing your cost analysis. It also has some other features as to it can show you the scatter chart. Now, there is a difference between a scatter chart and a bubble chart. Though most people use it interchangeably, there is a lot of difference. The scatter chart is basically just points, with different colors shown on a graph. It does not have the size of each of these dots that you see are same, as opposed to in the bubble chart, you have the size changes depending on a particular parameter. So this is a scatter chart, and it basically shows you the value of your project and the cost of doing these projects. And if you notice over here, they are color-coded by which projects were not selected, which projects were forced out, which projects were selected, and which projects were forced in. We'll talk about the force and force part right now. So let's say, for example, I say that, you know what, let's change this back to our $13 million, because that will make it easier to calculate things. So let's say one of these projects that have been moved out, let's say, for example, the internal software database audit. Well, this particular project is important because you have to use it. It is a safety or it's something that you have to do in order to provide some kind of value to your company. Well, you can go ahead and force in these projects so that it can calculate it when you include it in your portfolio analysis. I still have to go ahead and do the resource analysis. I'm going to jump right into it because I want to leave some time for question and answers. I will be posting a lot more about this on our blogs and even on the video. I will go ahead and put a lot more information in here. Since this was compressed into a 1-hour webinar, we were not able to cover up a lot of things, and I know it's only 15 minutes left for this webinar, so I want to have some time left for question and answers. So I'm going to jump right into the resource analysis part of it. I'll just name this as I'm going to jump to my resource analysis. So after you've done your cost analysis, after you've defined these constraints, you've changed the cost of your projects and seen which project moves out and which project moves in, you want to go ahead and see how your resources affect the projects also. You want to see if you have enough resources available to do these projects, and see how that affects your portfolio. So over here, it basically shows you when your projects are, scheduled to be done on a timeline. It basically is just like a Gantt chart, a portfolio, a project center view. It shows you which projects are scheduled to be performed and when they are going to be doing these projects. It also defines some of the more project level fields, such as it shows you the priority of these projects, whether they were forced in, forced out, or they were automatically included in your portfolio analysis, the original start date. We'll talk about the new start date, and it also has some other information about your project. Now, what we can do is, so let's say, for example, I go ahead and look at my requirement details view. Basically over here, it shows you FTE-wise how many resources on what role are needed to do these projects on a timeline. So let's say, for example, in January, I need 5 accountants in order to perform these portfolio analysis, in order to do these projects in there. It also shows you per project how many developers, how many project managers, and monthly-wise, how many I need during these projects. So you can easily see how many resources are required to do these projects. You can do some requirement analysis over here, resource analysis over here, determine if you need to hire more resources on your project in order to perform these projects, things like that. You can also, if I go back to my Gantt chart, you can also define when these projects start. So, for example, let's say, for some reason in November, I have only one, let's say, software developer, and that particular software developer is required by this project as well as this project. But I cannot hire any more software developers. But I need to perform both these projects. I need to do these projects together. So what I can do is I can just go ahead and change the start date for my project to start on a different date, and it'll still go ahead and so that I have enough resources to perform my projects correctly. You can also see the effect of hiring additional resources. You can input more resources over here, and it'll show you more, the effect of adding these resources to your portfolio. You also have a couple of reports over here. You have the deficit and the surplus report, basically showing you where your resources are, where you need more resources. If you have any negative numbers over here, I don't think we have any negative because I think we did not remove any of the projects that we were going to do. So in case if there are any negative numbers over here, it basically indicates that you need to hire more of a legal person or more of an executive in order to perform these resources. And these basically show surplus. Anything above 0 showing you surplus available for that particular month. Okay, we are running a little over time because of the issues that we had. So I'm just going to jump right to my presentation. We already covered up prioritizing the projects, performing the cost analysis part of it, performing the resource analysis part of it. So what are the last steps? So let's say you have done all this, you've gone ahead and determined what the best portfolio is for your projects. What do you do after that? Well, after you've done your portfolio analysis, you have an option to commit to these projects. There is a commit button over here, which you can, commit your projects to. Basically, what commit will do is it'll update 6 different project level fields. Basically, the committed planned end date, which when your finish date for this project is, committed planned start date, committed portfolio selection date, so when you actually ran this portfolio and when you committed to the portfolio. A couple of the decision dates for cost analysis and the resource analysis. When you perform the cost analysis and the resource analysis, it actually gives you that information also. You can also customize a workflow to kick in when you actually click on the commit button. It can go ahead and start a different process of assigning a project manager to your project, and doing other stuff in your analysis part of it. We still have another 5 minutes left, and I'm going to open some of the questions that you might have. I know I had to, we could not cover up a lot of information that I wanted to share, but I will be sharing more information on our blog. I will give our blog information and everything else. I'll be jumping right into our chat to see if you guys have any questions. Please feel free to ask me any questions that you might have. How often should you review your portfolio analysis? That's a really good question. It all depends on how your business drivers change, how often your business drivers change. Once you do your portfolio analysis, for any reason that your business drivers have changed, maybe you have, other business drivers that impact your projects more, you need to go ahead and update your portfolio analysis and get that in there. Well, committing a few projects, as I said, commit basically only changes these 6 project level fields. So unless you have a workflow included in there, you can easily go ahead and zero out these 6 fields that you have in there and redo your portfolio analysis. It is a lot more difficult to roll back if you have a custom workflow in place, which affects other information in your project. So it all depends on how you have it set up. Okay. Well, if you guys have no further questions, again, you can always. Let's talk about this. What do you do next? I'm seeing a question come up. Just give me one moment. Do impact statements have to be quantifiable? I would say yes. It's a lot easier to go ahead and put a number next to a driver impact and say how these particular project affects that particular business driver. If you don't have it quantifiable, it's a lot of work that needs to be done to define the priorities between these business drivers. So somebody also asked how you can make a yearly or quarterly portfolio analysis. I think when defining these portfolios, you do have an option. You can see if you want to, how granular you want to be. You want to do it monthly or quarters. I don't think you have an option to do it yearly, but you do have the planning horizon that you can control and see how your resources, what kind of resources are determined when you actually do your portfolio analysis. So you can control it that way. So what are the next steps? If you are not using Project 2010 or 2015, I would strongly recommend that you download at least a trial version from Microsoft, a free trial version from Microsoft website to try and see how it works. The portfolio analysis part is, of course, part of the project server, so you might not be able to try that part. But there are a lot of features that you can, start using with these softwares. You can also follow our blog and Twitter and Facebook feeds. I will be giving you information about, where you can go to for our blogs and Facebook feeds and all that stuff. You can learn more about Microsoft Project at Microsoft.com. You can also feel free to talk to us about Project 2013 or 2013 implementation, or even training. We do a lot of training. We have, predefined class that we do every month, so you can open enrollment classes. You can definitely contact us for that. This is our website. It's EPMAinc.com. You can also follow our blog at EPMAblog.com. You can feel free to email me if you have any questions or need any help. Feel free to email me at partiv.bhuta@epmainc.com. And you can also follow us on Twitter at EPMAinc. And you can also find us on Facebook. And any questions that you have, feel free to email us. Again, thank you everyone for joining this webinar. I really appreciate you guys joining us. Looking forward to seeing you at other webinars also.